For centuries, we have been scanning the depths of the Atlantic Ocean for a ghost, searching for the remains of a lost world in the cold, dark silence of the abyss. But the greatest mystery of human history has been hiding in plain sight, scorching under the relentless African sun. This is not a mere fable or a bedtime story for the gullible. It is a geographic anomaly that matches ancient records with a precision that borders on the impossible. In the desolate, wind-swept landscape of Mauritania, a massive, concentric structure stares back at the satellites of the modern world, mocking our current understanding of the past. As the shifting sands reveal what lay hidden for millennia, a disturbing reality surfaces. The cradle of a lost civilization might not be underwater, but rather buried beneath the very dust we once dismissed as a barren wasteland. If the eye of the Sahara is what the evidence suggests, then the timeline of human progress is not a straight line, but a fractured mirror. The Richat Structure is a geological formation so vast, it can only be fully appreciated from the vacuum of space. For decades, it was conveniently dismissed as an impact crater, a jagged scar from a meteorite that struck the Earth millions of years ago. However, when researchers finally analyzed the site, the narrative began to crumble. There was no evidence of the extreme heat or the presence of shocked quartz that a celestial impact would leave behind. The official consensus shifted, labeling it a deeply eroded volcanic dome, a convenient placeholder for something that defies easy categorization. The structure consists of massive concentric rings that look remarkably like a giant bullseye carved into the crust of the Earth. It measures nearly 24 kilometers in diameter, a scale that aligns with staggering accuracy to the descriptions left behind by the philosopher Plato over 2,000 years ago. Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, have long been the primary sources for the legend of Atlantis. While many historians have treated his account as a mere allegory or a philosophical exercise, his descriptions are suspiciously specific. He described Atlantis as a city composed of concentric rings, 3 of water and 2 of land, with a total diameter of 127 stadia. When converted to modern measurements, this equals approximately 23.5 kilometers. The Richat Structure measures almost exactly that. Plato also spoke of a mountain range to the north of the city, famous for its beauty and the abundance of its rivers. Directly to the north of the eye lie the Atlas Mountains. Today, they are arid and imposing, but satellite data confirms they were once a lush landscape fed by powerful waterways that carved deep valleys into the rock. The friction between academic skepticism and the physical reality of the Sahara is where the thriller truly begins. There is a tension between the rigid lines of textbooks and the shifting reality of the African dust. Modern archaeology maintains that humanity transitioned from primitive hunter-gatherers to organized societies only a few thousand years ago. Yet, the eye of the Sahara suggests a much older, much more complex narrative that we are only beginning to decode. Skeptics argue the structure is purely natural, a product of millions of years of patient erosion. But erosion does not explain why the site is littered with artifacts that simply should not be there. Thousands of Acheulean hand axes and stone tools have been found scattered across the outer rings, indicating a massive, sustained human presence in the distant past. More importantly, the site is covered in a layer of sea salt. We are told the Sahara has been a desert for millions of years, yet the presence of salt and marine fossils within these concentric rings suggests that the eye was once submerged, or at the very least, intrinsically connected to the ocean. If we look back 10,000 years, the Sahara was not the wall of sand we know today. It was a Green Sahara, a land of vast lakes, roaring rivers, and sprawling savannas. Satellite imagery has revealed the ancient beds of rivers, some as large as the Rhine, flowing directly toward the eye of the Sahara. These rivers would have provided a direct path from the city to the Atlantic, which Plato claimed was easily accessible. Today, the eye sits hundreds of feet above sea level, but the Earth is a living, shifting entity. Tectonic movements and the rising and falling of coastlines over thousands of years could have elevated the structure, leaving it high and dry as the water receded and the desert claimed the land. The isolation of the site today is its greatest protection, a silent guardian of a history we are not yet prepared to accept. The darker side of this investigation involves the Younger Dryas event, a period of sudden, cataclysmic cooling and violent flooding that occurred roughly 11,600 years ago. This date is not a random number. It matches the date Plato gave for the destruction of Atlantis, 9,000 years before his own time. Science tells us that during this period, the world experienced a series of massive meltwater pulses. The ice caps melted with terrifying speed, sea levels rose violently, and the geography of the planet was reshaped almost overnight. Imagine the scene. A civilization built within the Richat Structure, thriving in a green paradise, suddenly facing a surge of water from the Atlantic that rushed across the flat African plains. It would not have been a slow rise, but a wall of water and debris, turning a magnificent city into a muddy trap, and eventually burying it under a layer of sediment as the waters retreated and the climate shifted toward desolation. The sky would have turned a bruised purple, choked by the ash of distant fires and the moisture of a dying atmosphere. The sound would have been the first warning, a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the stone foundations, the collective groan of the earth as it buckled. Then, the horizon would simply vanish, replaced by a churning, black wall of water several stories high. In the concentric rings of the city, there would be no escape. The very design that provided safety and order would become a labyrinthine death trap. The water wouldn't just drown, it would grind. It carried with it the boulders of the Atlas Mountains, the trees of the lush savanna, and the remnants of everything it had already destroyed. The screams would be swallowed by the roar of 1,000 waterfalls, and in a single day and night, the world's greatest power would be reduced to a slurry of silt and bone. This brings us to the muddy shallows described in ancient texts. Plato wrote that after Atlantis sank, the sea in that area became impassable and unsearchable because of the shallow mud which the city had produced as it settled. For a city supposedly in the middle of the deep ocean, this description makes little sense. But for a structure located in a basin in Africa, a massive flood followed by a rapid retreat of water would leave exactly that, a wasteland of mud and silt that would eventually harden into the desert we see today. The Eye of the Sahara is surrounded by evidence of a massive high-energy water flow that moved from west to east, scouring the landscape and leaving behind long, teardrop-shaped islands of land that are only visible from high altitude. This suggests a tidal wave or a flood of such magnitude that it could have wiped an entire civilization off the map, leaving nothing but the skeletal rings of its foundation. The controversy deepens when we examine the materials used to build the legendary city. Plato noted that the inhabitants used stones of red, black, and white, which they quarried from the ground. Within the Richat structure today, you can find these exact colors of stone, volcanic rocks and sedimentary layers that match the description perfectly. He also mentioned that the city had a wealth of gold and copper. Mauritania is currently one of the richest sources of gold and copper in Africa, with mining operations still extracting massive amounts of wealth from the surrounding earth. The geological alignment is so precise it becomes uncomfortable for those who wish to maintain the status quo of history. The ground itself seems to hold the memory of a world that existed before the desert took hold, a graveyard of a civilization that may have been the common ancestor of the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Mayans. Why then is this site not the most studied archaeological location on Earth? The answer lies in the conflict between disciplines. Geologists see the eye as a natural formation because they look at the rock layers through the lens of deep time. Archaeologists often look the other way because they believe no advanced civilization could have existed during the era of the Younger Dryas. But both perspectives might be missing the truth by refusing to overlap. it is entirely possible for a natural geological formation to have been inhabited, modified, and built upon by an ancient people. We see this throughout history, humans using the natural landscape to their advantage, building cities into cliffs and harbors into bays. If an ancient culture found a series of natural concentric rings, they would have seen it as a fortress provided by the earth itself. The political instability of the region and the harsh, punishing environment of the Mauritanian desert have kept many explorers away, leaving the site a lonely sentinel in the middle of a forbidden wasteland. The danger of overlooking the Eye of the Sahara is not just a loss of historical knowledge, it is a fundamental misunderstanding of our own vulnerability. If a society as advanced as the one Plato described could be erased by a sudden natural cataclysm, it serves as a grim reminder that our own achievements are at the mercy of a shifting planet. The eye is a scar on the face of the earth, a reminder of a time when the world was volatile and the climate was a weapon of mass destruction. By dismissing the site as a mere geological curiosity, we risk ignoring the patterns of the past that dictate our future. Those who do make the journey speak of a profound sense of scale that cannot be captured in photographs. The heat is oppressive, the wind carries a constant grit of salt, and the silence is heavy. There is a strange atmosphere to the rings, a feeling of being watched by the earth itself. As the sun beats down on the red and black stones, the landscape feels less like a desert and more like a ruin. Plato described freshwater springs in the center of the city, and to this day, there are freshwater wells in the center of the Richat Structure, a rare and baffling occurrence in the middle of the Sahara. The surrounding mountains to the north are cut by deep, ancient valleys, once the paths of the rivers that would have provided life to the valley. Every piece of the puzzle fits the African landscape more closely than it ever fit the mid-Atlantic ridge. The mystery is no longer a matter of where, but why. The Sahara Eye is a challenge to our collective certainty. It suggests that we are not the first to achieve greatness, nor are we the first to face the possibility of extinction. Reclaiming the truth of this site is not about finding a lost city of gold. It is about acknowledging that our past is much longer and much more tragic than we have been led to believe. The eye is a mirror. It forces us to look at the ground beneath our feet and realize that the ground can move, the water can rise, and the desert can swallow everything we have built. Think of the muddy shallows, not as a geographic note, but as a mass grave. When the water finally receded, it would have left behind a viscous, gray-black sludge, miles deep in some places. Beneath that hardening crust, the intricate temples, the golden ornaments, and the bodies of millions were preserved in a low-oxygen tomb. Over thousands of years, as the sun baked the moisture out of the earth, that mud turned to the very dust that travelers now kick up with their boots. Every step taken in the Richat Structure might be a step over the roof of a palace or the remains of a library. The salt that stings the eyes of modern researchers is the literal residue of the ocean that came to claim its prize. The conflict remains. Is this a grand coincidence? A trick of nature that happens to mirror an ancient text? Or is it the most significant archaeological site in human history? To accept the latter is to admit that our narrative of progress is flawed and that we have forgotten more about our origins than we remember. The Eye of the Sahara doesn't just hold the secrets of the past, it holds a warning. In the absolute silence of the desert, the wind carries the echoes of a lost world, whispering that what happened before can happen again. The sands of time are not static. They are always moving, always ready to reclaim what was once theirs. As the sun sets over the Richat, the rings cast long, ominous shadows across the basin. The red, white, and black stones glow with a dull, residual heat, as if holding on to the energy of a fire that was extinguished 10 millennia ago. The debate will continue, and the skeptics will demand more proof, but the physical evidence remains unmoved. The measurements, the colors, the presence of salt, and the timing of the Great Flood all converge on this single point in the Mauritanian desert. Whether we choose to see it or not, the truth is there. It has been there for thousands of years, watching the rise and fall of empires that followed it. The story of Atlantis is not a myth buried in the sea. It is a reality buried in the sand. And as the wind blows the dust away, it is finally beginning to breathe again. We must ask ourselves what it means to live in a world where such a massive secret can be ignored for so long. Does it speak to our lack of tools or our lack of will? The eye of the Sahara stands as a testament to the resilience of the earth and the fragility of man. It invites us to look closer, to dig deeper, and to prepare for a reality where history is not a book that has been finished, but a manuscript with its most important pages torn out and buried in the silt. The desert is not empty, it is waiting. And as the modern world continues to accelerate toward its own uncertain future, the silent rings of the Richat remind us that eventually, everything returns to the dust. The eye does not just look at the stars, it looks at us, waiting to see if we will recognize our own reflection before the sands shift once more.